In July 1968, a mob boss said 4 words about Dean Martin's dead brother. What happened in the next 60 seconds made 20 grown men afraid to breathe. Security guards, who had seen everything, froze where they stood. Waiters carrying drinks stopped mid-step. And Vincent Morello, a man who had ordered killings without flinching, took 1 step backward for the first time in his life. Dean Martin never raised his voice, never lifted a hand, never even changed his expression. But something shifted in that room, something that made everyone present understand they were witnessing a moment that would be whispered about for decades. This is that story. The Sands Hotel, Las Vegas. Saturday night, July 13th, 1968. The Copa room was filled beyond capacity. 600 people packed into a space meant for 500, and still they kept coming. High rollers from Texas Oil Money sat 3 tables from Hollywood producers. Senators shared booths with men whose income sources nobody discussed. This was Las Vegas at its peak, and tonight was special because Dean Martin was performing his first show after a 3-week absence. Nobody knew why Dean had disappeared. His publicist called it exhaustion. The newspaper speculated about everything from secret film negotiations to romantic troubles. But the people closest to Dean knew the truth. He had been in Steubenville, Ohio, visiting his brother's grave. Bill Crocetti had been dead for 3 years now. Heart attack at 56. Dean still couldn't say his brother's name without his voice catching. Bill had been more than a brother. He had been Dean's protector, his first audience, the person who believed in him before anyone else did. When Dean was still Dino Crocetti, a skinny Italian kid dealing cards in back rooms, Bill was the one who said he would be a star someday. When Dean doubted himself, Bill never did. And now Bill was gone, buried in Ohio soil, and Dean carried that grief like a stone in his chest that never got lighter. But tonight was about work. Tonight was about giving 600 people the show they paid for. Dean was in his dressing room, adjusting his tie, running through his opening jokes in his head, when the knock came. Not a polite knock. 3 hard raps that said whoever was on the other side wasn't asking permission. Dean opened the door. A man in a black suit stood there, thick neck, no expression, the kind of face that had seen violence and didn't flinch from it. "Mr. Morello would like a word before your show." It wasn't a question. Dean knew the name. Everyone in Las Vegas knew the name. Vincent Morello ran the Chicago Outfit's Western operations. Unions, construction, gambling, and things that never made it into police reports. He was the kind of man who didn't ask twice, and the kind of man you didn't say no to unless you wanted problems that followed you home. Dean checked his watch. 5 minutes. That's all I have. The man in the black suit didn't respond, just turned and walked, expecting Dean to follow. And Dean did, because in this town, in this world, you played the game or you got played. They walked through the backstage corridor, past stagehands who suddenly found reasons to look elsewhere, past security guards who pretended not to see. Everyone knew what it meant when Morello's people came for you. It usually wasn't good, but Dean kept his pace steady, his face relaxed, his breathing calm. He had learned long ago that showing fear was the same as showing weakness, and showing weakness in front of men like Morello was a mistake you only made once. They reached a private lounge behind the main casino floor. 4 men stood against the walls, hands folded, eyes tracking everything. And in the center of the room, sitting in a leather chair like it was a throne, was Vincent Morello himself. He was shorter than Dean expected. Thick through the middle, silver hair slicked back, a cigar burning between his fingers. But it was his eyes that caught Dean's attention. Cold, calculating. The eyes of a man who measured everyone he met by what they could do for him and what it would cost to destroy them. Dean Martin. Morello's voice was smooth, almost friendly, but there was something underneath it, something that felt like a trap waiting to spring. "The king of Las Vegas. I've been wanting to meet you." Dean shook his hand. Firm grip, but Dean matched it. "Mr. Morello, I've heard a lot about you. All good, I hope." Morello smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "We're both Italian boys, Dino. Both came from nothing. Both made something of ourselves. I feel like we understand each other." Dean said nothing. He had learned that silence was sometimes the smartest answer. Morello took a long pull from his cigar, watching Dean through the smoke. I knew your family back in Steubenville. Your father had that barber shop on South 6th Street. Good man. Hard-working. Old country values. Dean's expression didn't change, but something inside him went very still. And you had a brother, didn't you? Older brother. Billy, was it? The room seemed to get smaller. The air seemed to get thinner. And Dean knew, in that moment, that whatever came next was going to change everything. Dean's voice was steady. Bill. We called him Bill. Morello nodded slowly, tapping ash from his cigar. Bill, right? I heard he passed a few years back. Heart attack, wasn't it? That's right. Morello shook his head. 56 years old. That's young. Way too young. He leaned forward, and Dean could smell the cigar smoke, the cologne. You know what I think killed him? Dean didn't respond. Didn't blink. Stress. Morello said the word like he was savoring it. The stress of watching someone else succeed. The stress of being the older brother who stayed behind while the younger one became famous. That kind of thing eats at a man's heart until one day it just stops. One of Morello's men laughed quietly. The others stayed silent, watching. Morello continued. I mean, think about it. There's you making millions, playing Vegas, on television every week. And there's Billy back in Ohio, probably working some factory job, wondering why God gave all the talent to his little brother and left him with nothing. That kind of resentment poisons a man from the inside. The room went completely still. Dean looked at Morello, really looked at him, and what Morello saw there made his smile falter. That's a terrible thing to say. Dean's voice was quiet, almost gentle, but something underneath it made every man in that room pay attention. Morello's smile came back, forced now. I'm just being honest. No, I want you to stop talking about my brother. The words hung in the air. Morello's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? You heard me. You're making jokes about a man you never met. A man who can't defend himself. A man whose grave I just visited 3 weeks ago. You're doing it to rattle me. To prove something to your men. Dean took one step closer. His voice dropped lower. I'm telling you right now, Mr. Morello. Stop. The silence was so complete, you could hear ice settling in glasses across the room. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Vincent Morello, for perhaps the first time in 20 years, didn't know what to say. Morello set his cigar down slowly. You've got some nerve, Martin. You know who you're talking to. I know exactly who I'm talking to. Then you know nobody talks to me like that. Dean didn't step back. I'll talk to you however I need to when you're disrespecting my brother's memory. You didn't know him. You never met him. You have no idea what kind of man he was. Morello stood up. Your brother was a nobody. A nothing. He worked. He died. And the only reason anyone remembers his name is because of you. And even that didn't help him. He still died in Ohio while you were out here, living like a king. So don't lecture me about respect, because your brother didn't earn any. Something shifted in Dean's eyes. Something cold. The nearest bodyguard took a half step back, without realizing it. Dean's hands stayed at his sides. His voice stayed calm. But everyone understood they were witnessing something dangerous. Mr. Morello, I'm giving you one chance. Right now. Apologize for what you just said. Show that somewhere underneath all of this, there's still a decent human being. Morello laughed harshly. Apologize. I don't apologize. Ever. To anyone. Dean nodded. Then I walk out on that stage in 10 minutes. 600 people out there. Senators. Producers. Newspaper columnists. And I'm going to tell them exactly what happened here tonight. I'm going to tell them Vincent Morello from Chicago made jokes about my dead brother dying from jealousy. Then I'm going to point to wherever you're sitting and make sure every person in that room sees your face. Morello's smile disappeared. You wouldn't dare. Try me. 60 seconds to apologize, or I end your reputation in this town tonight. You think I'm afraid of you? I think you're afraid of being embarrassed. I think you know that if I tell that story the way I can tell it, you'll never sit front row in Vegas again without people whispering about the night Dean Martin made you look small. The silence stretched. 10 seconds. 20. Morello's men looked at each other. This wasn't how things went. People didn't threaten Morello back. People didn't call his bluff. Finally, Morello spoke. His voice was tight. I apologize for what I said about your brother. Say his name. What? Say his name. Not my brother. His name. Morello's jaw tightened. I apologize for what I said about Bill. And you were wrong to say it. A long pause. I was wrong to say it. Dean nodded once, then turned and walked out without looking back. He had a show to do. Dean walked onto that stage 11 minutes later like nothing had happened. The crowd erupted when the spotlight hit him. 600 people on their feet, applause thundering through the Copa room, and Dean just stood there with that easy smile, that effortless charm, like he hadn't just stared down one of the most dangerous men in America. He did 90 minutes that night, told jokes, sang songs, made a woman in the third row blush so hard her husband started laughing. And not once, not for a single second, did anyone in that audience suspect that Dean Martin had been ready to burn his entire career to the ground 20 minutes earlier to defend his brother's memory. Morello stayed for the whole show. Front row, center table, surrounded by his men. He didn't laugh, didn't applaud, just watched. And when Dean took his final bow, when the crowd rose for a standing ovation that lasted 3 full minutes, Morello stood up quietly and walked out the side exit. He didn't come backstage, didn't send a message, just disappeared into the Las Vegas night like a ghost. Word spread fast. By the next morning, every casino manager, every entertainer, every person who mattered in that town had heard some version of what happened. Dean Martin stood up to Morello. Dean Martin made him apologize. Dean Martin looked a mob boss in the eye and didn't blink. Some people said Dean was brave. Others said he was crazy. A few said he was lucky to still be breathing. But everyone agreed on one thing. Whatever happened in that room, it had changed something. It had proven that there were still men in this world who couldn't be bought, couldn't be bullied, couldn't be broken. 8 years passed. 8 years of shows and movies, and life moving forward the way it always does. Then, in 1976, Dean was performing at Caesar's Palace when someone mentioned that Vincent Morello was in the audience. Dean had his security find him after the show and bring him backstage. Morello looked different now. Older, grayer, moving slower, like a man whose body was finally catching up to the life he had lived. But his eyes were still sharp, still watchful, still measuring everything. Dean, good show tonight. Thanks. What brings you to Vegas? Semi-retirement. Winters in Chicago were killing my knees. They made small talk for a few minutes. The weather, the new casinos going up, how different Vegas was becoming. But there was something unspoken between them, something that hung in the air like smoke from an old cigar. Finally, as Morello was turning to leave, he stopped. I've been wanting to tell you something. About that night back in '68. Dean waited. That night changed me. Not right away. Not completely. But it started something. You standing there, refusing to back down, demanding I respect your brother's name. It made me think about things I hadn't thought about in years. Made me think about my own brother, about what I would want someone to do if anyone ever disrespected his memory. Morello continued, his voice quieter now, almost human. I'm not saying I became a saint. I'm still in the business I'm in. But I started asking myself questions I never asked before. Is this necessary? Is this cruel? Would I want someone to treat my family this way? And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, I made different choices because of those questions. Because of you. Because of what you showed me that night. Dean nodded slowly. I'm glad something good came from it. Something did. Morello extended his hand. Dean shook it. No power games this time. No testing grips. Just two men who had found something like respect through conflict. Thank you, Dean, for having the guts to stand up when most men would have stayed silent, for showing me that power doesn't give you the right to be cruel, and for defending someone who couldn't defend himself. Bill would have done the same for me. I believe that. And that's what makes you different from most people I've met. When Vincent Morello died in 1983, Dean received a letter in the mail. It had been written months earlier, with instructions to send it if Morello passed. Dean opened it alone in his study, and what he read made him sit down slowly in his chair. Dean, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I wanted to thank you one last time for that night at the Sands. You showed me what real strength looks like. It's not about power. It's not about fear. It's about having something you believe in and refusing to let anyone take it from you. You had that. I spent most of my life thinking I had it too, but I was wrong. I had power. You had principle. There's a difference, and it took me too long to understand it. Your brother Bill would be proud of you. Not because you're famous, not because you're successful, but because you're the kind of man who would risk everything to protect his memory. That's rare. That's real. Thank you for teaching me that before it was too late. Vinny. Dean folded the letter carefully and placed it in his desk drawer, next to an old photograph of Bill standing outside their father's barbershop in Steubenville, smiling at the camera like he had all the time in the world. That night, Dean took out the photograph and held it for a long time. Bill looked so young in that picture, so alive, so unaware that his heart would betray him at 56, that he would leave behind a little brother who would carry his memory like a sacred thing for the rest of his life. I defended you, Bill. Dean spoke quietly to the photograph. When someone tried to make your death into a joke, when someone tried to turn your memory into a punchline, I stood up. The way you always stood up for me when we were kids. The way you stood between me and anyone who tried to hurt me. I hope you know. I hope somehow, wherever you are, you know. That's the real story of July 1968. Not that Dean Martin stood up to a mob boss. Not that he forced an apology from one of the most dangerous men in America. But that Dean Martin loved his brother so deeply, so completely, that no threat could silence him. No power could intimidate him. No consequence could make him betray Bill's memory. That's what real strength looks like. It doesn't shout. It doesn't threaten. It doesn't need to prove anything. It just stands firm, quiet and unshakable, and refuses to bend. When Dean Martin died in 1995, his family found photographs of Bill in every room of his house. In his office, by his bed, on his refrigerator. 30 years after Bill's death, Dean still kept his brother close. Still missed him every single day. Still loved him with a love that death couldn't touch. That's Dean Martin. That's his legacy. That's why we still tell his stories. If you loved learning about the real Dean Martin and how he handled this moment with grace, dignity, and unshakable love for his brother, make sure to like and subscribe. We bring you real stories from old Hollywood that show what true character looks like. Your support helps us keep these incredible stories alive.